Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Good Sunday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 16th of August. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that easily online at weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. Listen to your NOAA weather radio or tune in on Marine VHF. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391, and during the day you can find information on social media using Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. YouTube's great in the afternoon. You'll get your daily afternoon Alaska weather map briefing. It's about 3:45 or 4 o'clock or so. And if you just simply type in AKwx, you'll be able to find lots of links with our most recent updates there. That usually comes from NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks. If you want to follow those channels and subscribe, you'll always get notifications that way too. On Facebook, of course, you can find us on NWS Alaska, and on Twitter, also using that hashtag AKwx. It's a great way to continue the weather conversation before and after the Alaska Weather Show. Here's some of the Alaska weather headlines that we're tracking this afternoon. Rainy start to the week for many along the Gulf Coast. If you're in southern Alaska, you know it has been raining, and there's more to come for many parts of south central and southwest. However, for many in the west and the interior, the rain that you've seen today will become a little more showery as we head into the week. It may still be a little wet tomorrow, and there's cold air creeping in along the north slope. All that combined is helping to move the rain east and south into parts of southeastern Alaska. Your rain will be picking up as we go into the week, and today is probably one of the last dry days you'll see for a little while. Up to 1 to 2 inches of snow is now forecast for the central and eastern Brooks Range. No watches, warnings, or advisories just yet, but it does look like the weather is changing, and starting in the higher terrain, we'll start to see some of those more, shall we say, fall-like. We don't want to say winter just yet, even though I just did, but a little more fall-like changes as we get into Monday and Tuesday night. So up to 1 to 2 inches of snow there for the central and eastern Brooks Range, and that could include the Dalton Highway if you're traveling in that direction again Monday night and Tuesday. Now, fire danger is receding, and that's really good because it sounds like a lot of our fire crews from many of the villages are heading down to the lower 48. In the meantime, we still have some pockets of higher than normal fire danger, let's say, across parts of the upper Yukon, parts of the Deltana and Tanana Flats region, and also around the Copper River Basin. But as we've just talked about, rain is moving through many parts of the area now. Now let's take a look at it across the Bering Sea, and low pressure has replaced high pressure in the last week or so. The whole pattern has just switched out. We're still watching this very extensive feed of Pacific moisture working across the central and northern Pacific and into the Gulf of Alaska. And unfortunately, what you can't see are two tropical systems here on the very bottom of your screen. One of those is very close to the eastern shores of Asia. Another one is following its path, but it looks like that could take a curve and head northward here in the coming days. So we're still watching that, still waiting to see what impacts, if any, it will have on Alaska as we go into the coming weeks there. That would be ways away, but again, something that we're all watching fairly closely. If you look up north, you can still see that east to or west to east progression of cooler air moving off the Chukchi Seacoast and up around the Bering Strait. That is dropping southward, and it's helping to keep cool weather up across the north slope. We'll talk about that and the ice impacts here before we get into your marine weather segment in just a bit. Here's a visible satellite picture across Alaska now, and you can see that very wet flow working right across the Gulf of Alaska and southwestern Alaska. Out across the western Bering, already dry air showing back up as the low pressure system is dragging in wet weather in from south and west, hitting western parts of Alaska, but it's also helping to bring in that cooler and drier flow across the western part of the Bering Sea. Up north, plenty of clouds. In fact, most of Alaska today was covered up with either clouds and or fog. Out across southeast, well, the clouds started moving in today, and with that came a better chance for rainfall across the northern coast. Yakutat picked up about a quarter inch of rainfall today. Sitka, just a little bit of drizzle, only a trace measure, but by all intents and purposes, southeast still had a dry day. So again, hopefully it was a nice day where you were. Up north, we can see cloud cover across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, across the Seward Peninsula, and from Bethel southward, it was a fairly wet day. Bethel picked up about a quarter inch of rain there. Cordova, about 2/10. Cold Bay also saw about 2/10. Dutch Harbor, only a 1/10 for you today. And around Kenai, about a quarter inch of rain, with McGrath also seeing about 4/10. So a fairly soggy day, at least for the southern third, maybe even the southern half if you want to really stretch it out just a little bit. Now out across the west, low pressure is just off of a coast from Ammonok and out across the Norton Sound region. That trough is representing kind of a dividing line between very wet air for Alaska and pretty dry air coming in from the north. You can see the dry air punching through the clouds across the western Bering Sea. And we've drawn in the rain for you, so it's not too hard to see where that's falling across Alaska. Southeast again, fairly dry ahead of that wave of wetter air moving your way, and low pressure and several waves of it along that boundary across the north and western Gulf Coast and all the way just south of the Alaska Peninsula. As we go into the evening hours, watch for rain to continue for many parts of southern Alaska. South of the Alaska Range, we'll see another wave, kind of enhanced precipitation moving northward. Across southwestern Alaska, your rain will gradually diminish and become a little more showery in nature, but there is plenty of moisture to be had all the way around. And as a result, we'll see that rainfall move back into southeastern Alaska and be your predominant weather pattern for at least a couple days. Showers are expected around the Brooks Range, and we may see some drier weather north of Fairbanks, though you've had your fair share today. A period of rainfall really blossomed very close to home this afternoon. By tomorrow, there could be a few showers or storms, mainly north and east of Fairbanks. Wouldn't expect a whole lot more than that. A better chance for heavier rainfall around Prince William Sound and points east toward Yakutat and the northern entrances of southeast. The further south you go, the rainfall won't be quite as heavy from that. Cooler and drier air is making its way across the Alaska Peninsula, and that means anything we see across the peninsula will probably be more showery in nature. And the same goes for most of what we'll see along the western coast as you get into more of a northerly flow rather than that wetter southwesterly flow that's been coming ashore. Showers will continue around the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast from about Nuiqsut eastward toward Kaktovik, and Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse would be included there. High pressure sitting south of Kiska and Attu will keep a lock on some of the cloud cover and the moisture, and that marine layer will be pretty thick at times, and with that, fog and stratus should be expected. Showers are just north of Kiska and Attu there, with the next wave developing. What happens after that? Well, when we see this whole pattern shift a little bit further eastward, we see drier weather moving into the central and western Gulf. Periods of heavy rain will be possible again from Prince William Sound to Yakutat especially, and then a little bit further south. That should diminish a little bit in its intensity. Showers and thunderstorms will be primarily focused in western Canada, and that means anything that's left across southern and central Alaska will at least be showery and maybe occasionally rainy. But here's the little fly in the ointment. There's enough cold air coming into some of the higher terrain of the Brooks Range, including, again, the Dalton Highway, where you could see as much as 1 to 2 inches of snow if you're traveling in that direction. That'll be about 2 to 3, maybe even 4,000 feet. So you'll have to get up there a little bit, but the cold air is coming down, and with the moisture in place, it's that time of the year that we'll start to see some fresh powder in a few select spaces up north. Showers will continue across the Arctic coast and across the western Brooks Range. Probably not cold enough just yet for any widespread or accumulating snowfall there, but don't be surprised. And up across the west coast of the Bering, we see another wave of warmer and wetter air coming in on the northern side of this high pressure system. Remember, the air goes in clockwise form there. And that level's around 1,026 millibars, and that's enough to push that drier air into the Gulf. And eventually, it could allow for a warmer return out of the North Pacific. So a lot of changes going on this week, and still fairly unsettled through a large part of the last frontier. Temperatures across the state today in the 50s and 60s for southeastern Alaska, back to 61 around Juneau, 59 in Sitka, 50s and 60s for places like Ketchikan and Nanette. And around the Dixon entrance, temperatures were nearly uniform. 61 in Hyder this afternoon, 57 with rain in Yakutat. We were in the mid-50s for Prince William Sound, 57 in Seward, 59 in Homer. About the same there for Kenai with a quarter inch of rain again. and 58 degrees around Anchorage. Now up around the Susitna Valley, we saw temps in the mid-50s. The Matanuska Glacier reported 54, 60 around Golcana. One of the warmer spots today was Delta Junction, a little bit further over the mountains at 65 degrees. 63 degrees in Fairbanks, 58 in Eagle, and it was 55 in Fort Yukon. AKwx Pass showed temperatures in the lower 50s. Ambler and Bettles back in the mid-50s for the most part, 54 in Arctic Village. The Arctic coast was in the 30s and 40s with Deadhorse and New Ixich showing the coldest temperature earlier this morning at 32 degrees. The Chukchi Seacoast dropped into the lower 40s today. It was even warmer into Kotzebue Sound with 50s and 60s there. Kotzebue was 62, 53 in Nome. Unalakleet was 54. And as you head down or up the river, I should say, to Galena, it was 61. McGrath was 56 after a soggy day, 55 in Grayling. Sparrowbond showed lower 50s, 52 in Bethel. Nunivak Island was 55, and St. Lawrence Island around Savuga, a blustery day with winds up to 30 miles per hour and 48 degrees for you. Lower 50s around St. Paul and St. George, 50s and 60s for the Alaska Peninsula, 61 in Sand Point. Cold Bay and Falls Pass about the same today, 55 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor, and low 50s for the Central Aleutians for Adak and Atka. Now, overnight low temperatures in southeast will stay in the lower 50s. Some places after you get out of town around Anchorage and head up the road a little bit toward Chickaloon, you might get a little bit cooler in the upper 40s there. Most of the interior will be at or just below that 50-degree mark, including Fairbanks and Tanana. Looking northward, lower 30s should do the trick for the Arctic coast. Barrow, about 32 tonight. Around the Seward Peninsula, just shy of 50 degrees. Nome could be close to 50 again. Same goes for Unalakleet, McGrath, and Galena. Southwest and Bristol Bay, lower 50s tonight, 54 in Kodiak, and lower 50s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, and cooler than that for the central and western chain. High temperatures tomorrow, they're back in the mid-50s. The Alaska Peninsula back in the upper 50s to about 60 for King Salmon and Dillingham. Bethel about 59. Low to mid-60s for the middle interior, including Fairbanks, North Pole, and Tanana and Chena. Looks like lower 60s for most of southeast. A few places with heavier rainfall could be a little bit cooler into the 50s tomorrow. Prince William Sound, upper 50s should do it. Lower 60s for most along Cook Inlet, including Anchorage, Matsu, and northward into the Susitna Valley and Talkeetna. The North Slope, mid to upper 30s. Most places along the North Slope won't make it to 40 degrees tomorrow. Watch for Wainwright to be around 39. Flying conditions tomorrow include IFR for the Beaufort Seacoast as ice continues to break up just a little bit more. Again, we'll have an update on that ice edge here in just a few minutes. IFR conditions south of the Bering Strait along most of the west coast. Once you get into Bristol Bay, though, conditions might improve a little bit for MBFR. And IFR conditions south of Sitka to the Dixon entrance and also around Prince William Sound and Seward and south of Resurrection Bay. Here's your pass conditions. AKwx Pass and Adigan Pass we expect to be MVFR through most of your Monday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass also expecting to see marginal conditions through the start of the week. Rainy Pass, we may see a shower or storm generally on the western side, but chances are pretty slim. We put that in there just to give you a heads up if you're trying to get back home tonight. Windy Pass, VFR conditions transitioning to more of a marginal setup as we go through your day. Isabel Pass we expect to be VFR through most of the day. Mentasta Pass looks to be VFR through most of your Monday. And Tenita Pass also looks to be marginal through most of your Monday there. So conditions won't change very much as we go through your Monday or perhaps into Tuesday. Portage Pass, most of the pass should be marginal, but the eastern side has a pretty good chance at being instrument flight rule only. And Chilkoot and White Pass, after a pretty dry stretch, MVFR conditions are expected on Monday. Freezing levels show that colder air dropping southward. Now, it won't be far enough southward tomorrow to produce snow across the higher train of the Brooks Range. That'll be Monday night and Tuesday, but you can see it shaping up here. Again, the Arctic kind of cleaning up shop before it opens for business here in a few weeks. 10 to 12,000 foot levels there across the northern Gulf, and most of southeast is at or below 14,000 feet. So you can see a level between 10 and 14 there across most of the Panhandle and between 8 and 10 for most of the Alaska Peninsula and the chain, as well as Kodiak Island and areas just in the northern Gulf. Icing potential is starting to pick up a little bit, and you'll see at least light icing potential across the North Slope, the west coast around the Seward Peninsula and north of Amonic, also across the northern Gulf Coast and south to Kodiak above 8 to 12,000 feet. So watch for increased risks there for icing tomorrow. The jet stream shows several waves working across the Bering. The fastest one of these is working into southwestern Alaska right now. Those wind speeds are around 100 knots or so, and that's giving a little bit of an extra boost to the rainfall coming in from the south and the west. We also have cooler air trying to drop southward, but right now that west easterly flow is kind of holding that back. As soon as this lines up, though, it'll put a little bit more of a good position in to let that door open just a little bit more. Across the northern Gulf, 5 to 65 knot winds there across the region south of Kodiak Island. This is really, again, pushing a lot of that wet weather north and east quickly. Winds slow down and start to spread apart across southeast Alaska. What that does is add a little bit more lift to the atmosphere across the panhandle. Light winds for the interior, a north and westerly flow through most of western Alaska. You can see that trough of low pressure across the YK Delta with north and easterly winds coming across the Seward Peninsula and northerlies coming into the North Slope around 10 to 15 knots with a northwest flow for the chain, and southwesterlies, of course, still going strong at this level between 50 and 60 knots for the northern Gulf. So turbulence is back, and that means a little bit of a better chance for a ribbon of bumps across the northern and eastern Gulf Coast. Occasional moderate is possible below 6,000 feet and east of Kodiak Island, and just offshore of the Beaufort or the Chukchi seacoast below 3,000 feet, we should watch for some light to perhaps even isolated moderate turbulence as we go throughout your Monday. That's a look at your aviation forecast. I'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Hello everyone and welcome to Alaska Weather Facts. I'm Jim Peranto. Today in the studio I have Christine Nelson, who's the meteorologist in charge at the CWSU or Center Weather Service Unit, and it's based out of Anchorage, and she's here today to talk to us about what the CWSU does and the kinds of information it provides. Welcome, Christine.
Thank you.
I have to admit, I know very little about the CWSU, which is why I'm glad you're in here today to enlighten me and the viewers out there. I know some forecasters in Alaska have at some time or another gone through the CWSU, and I want to start off with, why was it created?
The Center Weather Service Unit, also called the CWSU, was created nationally, was created following a series of fatal aircraft accidents, and in particular one that happened near New Hope, Georgia in the mid-1970s. A DC-9 Southern Airways jet ran into a line of intense thunderstorms and crashed. The NTSB reports of all these fatal accidents determined that better weather information provided to the pilots could have prevented these accidents. So in response to the NTSB report, the FAA contracted with the National Weather Service to bring meteorologists into the control centers. And that's how we were formed.
And so this is, you said the mid-70s. I believe the crash that you're talking about was 1977.
Right.
And so CWSU's been around 25 years roughly.
Right.
So who's your primary customer then?
Our primary customer is the Air Route Traffic Control Center, basically the air traffic managers within the center. Although we do provide weather information to TRACONs, our main primary customer is the controllers.
Okay. And where is the CWSU located in Anchorage?
We're co-located with the ARTC. We are inside, right there with the controllers, face to face, right with them.
So is that at the international airport, or is that at Merrill Field? What?
It's actually near the Elmendorf base.
Oh, okay.
Is where they're located, off of Boniface.
I've always wondered, where you were located. Are you the only unit in Alaska?
We are the only unit in Alaska, yes.
Okay.
And there are 20 others across the lower 48.
Okay. So you're providing exclusive information to the air traffic managers or controllers out at...
Yes, just for Alaska.
Okay. All right. So how does the CWSU assist air traffic managers or controllers in managing air traffic?
Right. We provide 2 weather briefings a day, and we focus on major weather features that could adversely affect air traffic into the 10 major airports in Alaska. And those weather features are turbulence, icing, low-level wind shear, precipitation, low clouds, whatever is the main concern for those particular airports. And those airports do range from the North Coast to the Aleutians to the Southeast Panhandle, and include the larger airports in Alaska of Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau.
That's a big area.
It's a huge area.
And you also provide some information with volcanoes, correct?
Yes, we do. We provide volcanic weather support, well, kind of volcanic ash support, where the ash is going to travel. And of course, that is weather dependent, how the winds are flowing. We also, we don't do it alone. The CWSU coordinates with the Alaska Volcano Organization and also the National Weather Service's Air Weather Unit to try and determine what the plume height was and kind of plume direction. And from that point, the AKwx, the air weather unit, produces a segment, and from that segment, the Center Weather Service Unit produces a graphical segment so that it's easy to understand at a glance. We provide that for the controllers at the ARTC, and then we also take that graphic and we fax it out to 70 outside users as a courtesy.
So are there any products available to the public that they can get from the CWSU?
Yeah, there are two currently. There's the Center Weather Advisory, also called the CWA, and the Meteorological Impact Statement called the MIS. The MIS and the CWA are basically produced when there are adverse weather conditions that may affect air traffic in the entire state of Alaska. But in addition, MISs, we also will issue an MIS for temperatures minus 65 degrees or colder aloft, because jet fuel congeals at minus 65. So aircraft want to avoid those heights that those temperatures are occurring. And then the other that we issue is for altimeters that are going to be 31 inches or greater, because there are no aircraft altimeters that go that high.
Yeah,
so.
and that's good information to the pilots out there.
Right.
That they can actually grab that stuff right off your internet page, correct?
Yes, right off the page.
Is there any plans in the future for increased information sharing between the CWSU and the public?
The FAA is testing some technology that will allow people who get the software and go through all the appropriate procedures, but they're testing some software that will allow CWSU produced graphics and forecasts to be viewed by flight service station, air traffic controller, towers, and also by pilots.
Okay.
So it's be part of the capstone project, but that's coming. It's something that's being worked on.
Great. And you're fairly new into this position.
Yes, I've been here 5 months.
Okay, and how's everything going so far?
Oh, I love it. Alaska's great.
Yeah, and you've been up here before.
I was here in '93, actually in Fairbanks. I did fire weather forecasting for the summer in Fairbanks and just had a great time.
Great, great. Well, appreciate you coming in here today, and if people want to get some more information from the CWSU, they can email you.
Absolutely.
And I think you've also provided a phone number. They can call the office directly.
Yes.
And I invite the viewers out there to check out the website, because there's a lot of good information on there besides the MISs and the CWAs.
Right. There's also links to the air weather unit, which is actually located in the forecast office, so you can get to their products as well.
Great. Well, thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you. And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
Thanks, Jim. Here's a look at today's sea ice edge. And one thing to note, with northerly winds coming in, the melting is slowing down there. We don't expect any ice to return to the Chukchi Seacoast anytime soon, but conditions here are very slow to change. There are some pockets of open water there, but ships working along the coast will have to traverse some areas with some thicker ice and perhaps a few spots that are just wide enough to get through. But make sure you know what you're doing before you do that. Weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php is the place to check out the latest information and get the analysis as well as the 5-day forecast, as conditions kind of are stuck in place across the Beaufort Seacoast right now. Here's a look at the southeast forecast now for wind. Winds are coming up, and as the winds come ashore, you're getting more rainfall. A southwesterly flow picking up to 25 to 30 knots in the north, 20 knots from the west and southwest with 7-foot seas, and southeasterlies on the inside waters 20 to 25 knots. A southerly flow as strong as 25 knots with 5-foot seas in the Lynn Canal on Monday. That comes up to 40 as we head into Tuesday with 8-foot seas there. So stronger winds are expected. Batten down the hatches with southwesterlies across the Clarence Strait at 30 knots and 14, 15, even 16-foot seas coming up the north coast with 30 to 35 knots there. Small crafts will develop and even stronger winds into gales as we head into the Lynn Canal on Tuesday. Now, Monday, watch for east and southeasterly winds to take shape across the northern Gulf, 15 to 25 knots from Prince William Sound into the outside. Southeasterlies coming into the eastern Barrens. The western Barrens still dealing with a northerly flow coming down Cook Inlet at 10 to 15 knots, 30 knots there on the east side of Kodiak. Becoming westerly with time on Tuesday. West and southwesterly winds coming up the western part of the Gulf with northwesterlies inside of Prince William Sound and southwesterlies coming up Cook Inlet. 10, 20, even 30 knot winds there developing with 2 to 11-foot seas just west of the Barrens, 7-foot seas inside of Shelikof Strait. So more wind is on the way. For the Alaska Peninsula, light winds inside of Bristol Bay, westerlies north of Cold Bay, and you see north and westerly winds there south of Sand Point and King Cove with 11-foot seas. Southwesterlies from Chignik to Castle Cape on a 30-knot wind that brings us 13-foot seas. Winds diminish a little bit there on Tuesday with a westerly flow to 25 knots. Westerlies also inside of Bristol Bay at 20 knots, with northerlies developing down the coast at 20 knots with a 4-foot sea. As we get into the Aleutians, north and westerly winds will be the rule for Monday for most of the central and eastern chain. 15 to 20 knots in those areas, 6 to 9 foot seas on the Bering Sea coast, and 5 to 6 foot seas for the Bering Sea coast, or the Pacific, I should say. Westerlies 15 knots with a 5-foot sea, northerlies around Kiska. That reverses and blows east as we head into Tuesday around Kiska to Attu, where winds become southwesterly, and winds a little more variable through the day from Nikolsky and Unalaska southward. Otherwise, a northeasterly wind will be pushed into the region at about 10 to 20 knots. For the west coast, northerlies coming down out of the Bering Strait. It's going to be colder, but it will be drier. 20 knots there with 4 to 5 foot seas in most areas from Nunivak Island north toward St. Lawrence and St. Matthew, with west and northwest winds from the Kuskokwim Delta all the way out toward St. Paul and St. George. For Tuesday, more of an onshore westerly flow coming in. 20 knots in most areas, with an exception around the Pribilofs at 15 knots, and 4 to 5 foot seas in most areas, with 6 foot seas a little bit closer to the Kuskokwim Delta region. For the north, look for an east and northeasterly flow. That means, again, that melting is slowing down. Winds will be a little stronger around the Chukchi seacoast at 30 knots, with 6 to 8 foot seas there. By Tuesday, north and easterly winds, 3 to 4 foot seas for the Beaufort, and 3 to 8 foot seas down the Chukchi coast, from 15 knots around Point Barrow to 30 knots around Point Hope and into the outer Kotzebue Sound region at 25 knots with a 7-foot sea. So more wind for you as well. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. Rain is on the plane for most areas for south central and southwestern Alaska. The further west you go, the more showery in nature the rain will be. Heavier rain is picking up around the north and eastern Gulf Coast from Yakutat down into the northern entrances, and that'll be the rule for most of southeast as we get into Monday. Garden variety rain the further south you go. Maybe a few storms in the northern Alcan, and watch for snow around the Dalton highways we get into Monday night to Tuesday. 1 to 2 inches there. Have a good night.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.